Hey everyone, Robin from Backscatter here, and today we're taking a look at the Nikon Z7 full frame mirrorless camera. This high resolution 46 megapixel beast produces the best overall image quality that we've seen yet from a mirrorless camera. Let's break down what us underwater shooters need to know. Let's start with our most important factor, the image quality. Image quality is the baseline for all of our camera reviews. We're looking for sharp detail in the image resolution and rich dynamic range that allows us to pull out details from the darkest shadows and brightest highlights. In the case of the Z7, we're comparing the image quality against the Nikon D850, which is the Z7's closest relative, and it's our current pick for the best still image quality produced from any camera that we've tested underwater. In our opinion, the Z7 packs the best imaging sensor found in any current mirrorless camera that we've shot. Images that the Z7 captures are packed with sharp detail and vibrant colors. The Z7 is leading the current camera pack when it comes to raw image quality. It comes in second only to the Nikon D850, and honestly, you'd have to get down to some really tight pixel peeping to pick out any significant differences. We're also stoked that the Z7 shares the D850's native ISO value of 64. This gets us an additional 2/3 of a stop of dynamic range, giving us that phenomenal detail in the highlights and shadows. A good example of this is in wide scenes where the reef in the foreground is dark and the sunball lit surface is clipping out to pure white. Shots like this one give us a look at the raw power of the Z7, where we get plenty of texture from the reef, plenty of surface detail in the water and around the sunball, and a big pop of color from our barrel sponge subject. We even get some sharp detail on our dive buddy hanging out back there in the water column. This shot of a school of grunts is a good look at the color reproduction and sharp image detail that the Z7 produces straight out of camera. One of the biggest things to consider when looking at mirrorless cameras is the electronic viewfinder, or the EVF for short. The lack of an optical prism and mirror within the camera body is the defining difference between mirrorless and SLR cameras. Up until now, the EVF found on most mirrorless cameras has been our biggest turnoff. The problem is that most of them just don't come close to the dynamic range that an optical viewfinder can display, leaving us to struggle when composing shots because we just can't see what's going on in the underexposed foreground and overexposed background. You basically have to pop off a test shot to actually see what you're working with and then adjust from there. As soon as we had the Z7 in a housing and under the surface, the new and improved EVF quality was immediately apparent. This is hands down the best EVF we've put our eyes and mask up to yet. It's so good you'll almost think that you're looking through an optical viewfinder. We were able to easily line up this shot of a stingray and nail it quickly thanks to the dynamic range and clarity of the EVF, because it actually allowed us to see what was going on with the reef backdrop and compose the shot accordingly, as opposed to having to burn some test shots to achieve the same thing, which could have easily spooked our subject. While it is totally possible to just shoot from the LCD screen and not use the EVF at all, we actually prefer the EVF because we're always trying to get our camera to shoot as close as possible to traditional SLR style. This can bring a number of benefits, but where we feel it the most is when shooting macro and using an expanded 45-degree viewfinder on the housing. By keeping your eye on the viewfinder, you can get that camera nice and low in the sand for small macro subjects and not have to contort your head and face into an awkward angle or get buried in the sand just to see what you're shooting. Another benefit of the EVF is the ability to see your image playback for review purposes directly in the EVF, meaning that you never have to take your eye away to review your shot and make adjustments. This is incredibly helpful when shooting super macro because any camera movement of even a few millimeters can totally lose your subject. Having to pull your head away from an optical viewfinder to see your image on the LCD screen can sometimes mean just enough camera movement to force you to have to hunt for your subject again or recompose the shot. Between electronic image quality and in-viewfinder image review, we feel that the EVF on the Z7 has raised the bar for what we expect from a mirrorless camera viewfinder. Overall, the Z7 performed fairly well in the autofocus department with good speed and accuracy. It wasn't quite as fast as a Nikon SLR, but it still felt snappy and responsive. The biggest thing to note about autofocus is that the Z7 uses an entirely new system for autofocus, both inside the camera and in terms of user control, so those migrating from a Nikon SLR may find it to be a little unfamiliar at first, but ultimately easy to adjust and to use. There is a subject tracking mode, but it's not the same as the 3D tracking that we have in the D850 and D500. To activate the focus tracking, you have to switch to AFC, then set the AF area mode to Auto AF. Hit OK, back out of the I menu, then hit OK again to bring up the area selector, place your box over your subject, hit OK to tag it, then hold down AF on to track and engage the autofocus. For challenging autofocus scenarios like close focus wide angle and super macro, we did experience some focus hunting. It wasn't enough to be considered a hindrance, but it was something that we noticed. We shot super macro with our 105 VR lens and a diopter. Shooting like this gives us a 1:1 and higher reproduction ratio, which would be considered a true stress test for any camera's autofocus system. For most shots, if we roughed in the focus, the autofocus could do the rest of the work and snap to the subject consistently. If the shot was so out of focus as to be nothing but bokeh blobs through the viewfinder, then the camera wanted to hunt a lot more and had a harder time snapping to focus. It seemed to us that the Z7 liked surfaces with a lot of texture and contrast for the best autofocus results. If you're looking for the ultimate high-performance autofocus, the Z7 just isn't going to match what the D850 can do, but it is pretty good, and it sits right about in the middle of the pack overall compared to other current full-frame mirrorless cameras. The biggest change to the camera body itself is the debut of the new Z-mount for Z-mount lenses. Nikon plans to accommodate some very wide open aperture lenses, which need a wide opening to the sensor, so they developed the Z-mount to achieve this. So far, there aren't any Z-mount lenses that we're excited about shooting underwater, or at least at the time of making this review, but fortunately for us, Nikon also released an F-mount adapter, so your traditional lenses will work just fine. The adapter supports full autofocus, aperture, and metering, just as if using those F-mount lenses on a native body. We did find that third-party lenses and older Nikon lenses wouldn't autofocus with the adapter, so for now, it's best to just use current generation Nikon lenses. The camera body itself is smaller than a D850 or D500, and it really doesn't sacrifice anything when it comes to primary controls and operation. One of our favorite things is the I menu for quick menu access to key controls and as a workaround to having to go digging deep into the main menu. There's a photo to video mode switch, and the camera remembers your independent settings for each, so you don't have to waste time adjusting shutter speed and white balance when going from photo to video or vice versa on the fly. There's a front and rear dial for aperture and shutter speed, and a dedicated ISO button. There's also a single XQD card slot, so make sure to pick up one of those cards since your SD cards will do no good here. One thing worth mentioning is a frequent misconception about size and weight savings when it comes to mirrorless versus SLR camera bodies. Yes, this body is smaller than its SLR counterparts, which is nice for topside and saving some arm strain or some backpack weight, but when you get down to it for underwater purposes, by the time you have the camera in a housing with a port to support a full-frame lens, not to mention arms and lights, you really aren't left with any huge size savings or reduction of in-water profile. For travel and diving purposes, you could basically consider this system about the same as an SLR. Straight out of the box, most mirrorless cameras, the Z7 included, are configured by default to be shot like a compact camera. That is, that they expect you to shoot primarily from the LCD screen. We want to set up our Z7 to shoot as close as possible to an SLR to make good use of that electronic viewfinder. A key setting on the Z7 is disabling the automatic image playback in the electronic viewfinder. This allows us to maintain an uninterrupted live view through the EVF so we can shoot away without any blackout or pop-ups. This nets us a faster overall shooting speed where we're basically only limited to the recycle rate of our strobes. This is critical for those shots where you're looking for that split-second action moment like a ray taking off from the sand. You have to be able to see that thing the whole time and time your shots just right, and when every single shot results in an automatic pop-up or a viewfinder blackout, that's a major drawback. The Z7 makes it easy to nail these shots as long as you just set it up right. When you need to check the shot, just hit the playback button and the image pops up right there in the EVF, giving you instant feedback and allowing you to keep your shooting position. This also frees up the LCD screen to display your iMenu and key settings. And one other thing that we modify is the press and hold requirement for buttons like ISO. We switch these to toggle so that we don't have to do an awkward control, hold, and dial activation simultaneously. Instead, we just tap, scroll, and tap again to set. The Z7 captures full-frame 4K 30p video at 144 megabits per second in H.264. It does so using the full width of the sensor, so there's no crop factor to deal with when rolling video. This is really cool because it means you can get some super wide fisheye shots, or enable the crop sensor DX mode to tighten up those shots without sacrificing depth of field, which is especially useful when shooting macro. The Z7 also has 5-axis in-body image stabilization, helping to smooth out your clips for that graceful cinematic look. For us underwater shooters, the true test of any camera's video capabilities comes down to ambient light custom white balance color. One of our backscatter video mantras is that if the color ain't right, nothing else matters. And fortunately for us, the Z7 produces some really good looking ambient light underwater color. The white balance results look great down to about 45 to the 50 foot range in our tropical, clear, blue water testing conditions. Between 50 to 55 feet is where we started to notice the color fall apart a bit, with the watercolor starting to shift away from blue and more towards magenta, but that's about the normal expected range for most ambient light custom white balance captures. The color results looked very similar to those that we got from the D850, which was a monumental leap forward by Nikon. Consider this, we basically wrote off the D500 for video, and that camera is still current. With the Z7, and of course the D850 as well, we're talking about light years worth of underwater color improvements over previous Nikon cameras. There isn't a dedicated white balance button on the camera, but the function is easily accessed through the iMenu, and a new white balance can be executed super easily. This is one of the fastest and easiest to execute custom white balances out there right now. The Z7 is a great camera for still shooters that want a smaller camera body without sacrificing image quality or camera control. The electronic viewfinder is the best we've seen yet on a mirrorless body. If you're mainly a video shooter, then we may still recommend a Canon for getting color past the 45 foot range, but up to that depth, the Z7 looks really good and amazing when compared to older Nikon examples. It's not the most high performance autofocus that we've shot, but it does get the job done. If you have any questions, or if you want to learn more about the Nikon Z7, don't hesitate to reach out to us here at Backscatter. We dive, shoot, and service everything that we sell, and every purchase from us includes free lifetime tech support. We're always happy to talk gear or just geek out with other underwater camera nerds, so hit us up next time you need some equipment or some questions answered. We also lead the world's best trips, classes, and workshops specifically designed for the underwater image maker. We lead expeditions all over the world, all year round, so come with us when it's time for your next image making adventure. I'm Robin from Backscatter signing off. Keep your O-ring clean and happy shooting.